Two clear signs that love has gone, a Zen and Buddhist approach. Have you ever wondered what love truly is? Is it an eternal bond that transcends time, or is it something far more fleeting, more transient than we often dare to admit? Have you ever experienced the pain of losing someone you loved, and wondered if the love you shared was meant to last forever or if it was only ever meant to teach you something in the fleeting moments it existed? These are questions that have echoed throughout history, woven into the hearts of every person who has loved and lost. But what if the answer is not what we think? What if love is not about possession, not about eternal constancy, but about the freedom to embrace change, loss, and impermanence? In Zen and Buddhist philosophy, love is understood in a radically different way than we often consider in our everyday lives. We often see love as something to be held onto, something that defines us, something that must remain constant and unchanging. But Zen teachings tell us something profound: love is not eternal. It is fleeting. It is a river that flows through us, not something to possess or to control. In Buddhism, we are taught that everything, even love, is impermanent, constantly shifting, evolving, and ultimately passing away. Love is not something to hold onto forever, but something to experience fully in the present moment, to be appreciated for the beauty it brings, even when it fades. But how do we reconcile this truth with our deep desire to hold onto love, to make it last, to prevent it from slipping away? How do we face the inevitable loss of love without bitterness, without regret, without anger? Can we truly embrace love for what it is, knowing that it is fleeting? And what does it mean to let go of love, when everything inside of us screams to hold on, to fight for it, to never let it go? To answer these questions, let's journey through a Zen parable, a simple story, yet one filled with profound lessons that illuminate how we can face love, loss, and change with grace and acceptance. It is the story of a traveler, a man much like ourselves, who embarks on a journey not only through the world, but through the heart. The traveler in this story sets out on a path in search of wisdom, seeking to understand the nature of love and the pain of losing it. Throughout his journey, he encounters many challenges, each one leading him to face deeper truths about himself, about others, and about the world around him. But it is not until he meets an old Zen monk that the traveler begins to truly understand the teachings of love, loss, and letting go. The monk, with his quiet presence and deep wisdom, does not offer simple answers or easy solutions. Instead, he invites the traveler to look inward, to face the impermanence of life, and to accept that everything, including love, is temporary. But how does one learn to accept this truth, especially when the heart feels as though it cannot bear the weight of loss? How does one love, and then let go, without resentment, without bitterness, without a sense of finality? Can the heart truly release its grip on something so precious without shattering in the process? This Zen parable does not provide us with easy answers. Instead, it challenges us to explore the nature of love itself, its impermanence, its fleeting beauty, and the freedom that comes with learning to let go. It teaches us how to embrace love in all its forms, knowing that it is not ours to possess, but ours to experience in the moment it is given. It shows us how to release love without bitterness, how to honor what was without clinging to what is no longer there. And most importantly, it reveals that the key to healing, to peace, and to freedom lies not in holding on, but in letting go. The lessons embedded in this Zen story are not just for the traveler in the parable, they are for all of us. We are all travelers on the journey of love and loss, of change and impermanence. And just like the traveler in the story, we too must learn how to face the truth of our own hearts, to accept that love, like everything else, is transient, and that letting go is not an act of defeat, but of liberation. So, how can we release love without bitterness? How can we embrace the impermanence of love, without clinging to the past, without holding on to the pain of loss? What lessons does the Zen story offer us, and how can we apply them in our own lives? To answer these questions, let's look deeper into the story and explore how the teachings of Zen can guide us in letting go, in accepting change, and in finding peace amidst the ebb and flow of love. In the next part of our journey, we will delve deeper into the story of the traveler and the monk, exploring the profound wisdom of Zen teachings on love, loss, and letting go. We will uncover the spiritual truths that have the power to transform our relationship with love and help us navigate the painful yet beautiful path of letting go, without resentment, without bitterness, and with the grace that comes from true acceptance. Are you ready to walk this path with us? To discover how to release the burden of attachment and step into the freedom of letting go? Join us as we continue this journey of self-discovery, transformation, and acceptance, learning to love, lose, and let go with peace and wisdom. The ultimate truth, the one that resonates deeply within the hearts of all who seek wisdom, is that love does not truly disappear, it transforms. The traveler's journey did not end at the monastery, nor did his lesson conclude with the monk's wise words. His path, like all paths in life, continued onward, winding through valleys of memory and mountains of longing. But with each step he took, the weight on his heart grew lighter, as though each footfall left behind the sorrow that had once weighed him down. The love he had once known, so pure, so consuming, had shifted. It was no longer the vibrant, all-encompassing affection he had experienced, but a quieter, subtler presence. It had become a lesson, a cherished memory, and a part of his own growth. It had left him, yes, but in leaving, it had shaped him. In its departure, it had not left him empty, it had left him with a deeper understanding of himself and of the nature of love itself. And so, as the traveler walked along the winding road, he came to a great river. Its waters flowed endlessly, winding through the landscape, a symbol of the ceaseless movement of life. He stood at its edge, watching the current rush past, the soft ripple of water against stone echoing in his mind. For a moment, he thought about the one who had left him, the absence that had filled his heart, the pain of longing, the countless nights spent wondering why things had ended. The questions of what went wrong and why couldn't it have lasted filled his thoughts. But then, as he watched the river flow, something inside him clicked into place. A profound understanding washed over him. Love had not disappeared. It had simply transformed. The love he once saw in another's eyes was now reflected back to him in his own, like the river that had moved from one place to another, taking on a new form but never ceasing to flow. Love had not died, it had moved, just as everything else in life moves. It had shifted, evolved, and become something else, a part of him, a part of the vast, interconnected web of existence. With this realization, the traveler did not weep. He did not fall into despair. He did not grieve as he once might have. Instead, he bowed not to the pain of loss, not to the absence that once filled his heart, but to love itself, in all its forms. He bowed in gratitude for the love he had experienced, for the lessons it had taught him, and for the strength it had given him to move forward. Then, with a heart that was now at peace, the traveler continued on his way, not in search of another love to possess, but in acceptance of love, wherever it may come from, and however it may leave. For love is not something to be held tightly, not something to be captured or confined. It is something to be lived, to be experienced, to be felt deeply in the moment, knowing that it will not last forever, but that does not make it any less beautiful. As the traveler walked away from the river, the truth of love's impermanence settled gently within him. He understood now that love, in its truest form, is not about attachment. It is not about ownership. It is not about holding on to something that cannot be held. Instead, love is about embracing what is here, in this moment, and letting it go when the time comes. It is about experiencing the fullness of love without the fear of loss. And in this, there is freedom. This Zen story, though simple in its telling, holds a profound truth about life, love, and loss. It teaches us that love, like everything else, is impermanent. And when we accept this truth, we free ourselves from the suffering of attachment. We stop clinging to what is fleeting and begin to live fully in the present, open to the love that comes and goes, and to the beauty of each passing moment. By embracing the impermanence of love, we let go of the idea that we must hold on to it forever. We release the need to control, possess, or maintain a relationship, and we learn to appreciate love for what it is, a precious gift that arrives, stays for a time, and then leaves. It is not the leaving that causes suffering, it is our refusal to accept the leaving that brings us pain. When we allow love to move, to transform, to flow as it naturally does, we are free. So, what is the ultimate lesson from this story? It is not simply that love is fleeting or that loss is inevitable. It is the understanding that in every moment, love is present in our hearts, in the world around us, in the connections we share with others. And when love shifts, when it fades, when it changes form, it is not gone. It is simply moving, becoming something else, and leaving behind a space for new love to enter. In that space, there is room for healing, for growth, and for the acceptance of life as it is. Now, as you reflect on this story and its lessons, ask yourself, are you holding on to something that no longer serves you? Are you clinging to a love that has faded, or are you ready to let it go with gratitude and grace? The path of love is one of constant transformation. But with acceptance, with an open heart, and with the wisdom of impermanence, we can live fully, love freely, and move through life with peace. If this story resonated with you, if you feel the pull to explore these teachings further, don't hesitate to engage with us. Like, share, and subscribe to our channel to continue your journey toward understanding, acceptance, and inner peace. There is always more to learn, more to uncover, and more wisdom to embrace. Let us walk this path together, exploring the depths of love, loss, and the beauty of letting go. And who knows? In our next video, we might explore more profound teachings on the impermanence of life, perhaps delving into the way we experience change and how we can find peace in the face of life's inevitable transitions. Stay tuned, and remember, love is not something to hold on to, it is something to live. So, live it fully, live it freely, and live it without regret. The journey is just beginning. The Zen story of love and loss. The traveler had journeyed for many days, traversing steep hills and winding paths, the sun hanging low on the horizon as he finally reached the foot of the mountain. Here, nestled within a grove of trees, stood a small temple. It was serene, its roof draped with moss, and the air around it seemed to pulse with a quiet, unspoken power. This was the place where the old monk resided, a place untouched by the noise of the world, a place of stillness and introspection. The traveler, weary from his long journey, approached the temple with a mixture of uncertainty and hope. The question that had been weighing heavily on his heart of love and its inevitable unraveling had led him here, seeking wisdom from a man known for his deep understanding of life, loss, and the impermanence of all things. Upon reaching the temple gates, he found the monk sitting quietly under the shade of an old tree. The monk's eyes were closed, his posture relaxed, as though he was completely at peace with the world around him. The traveler hesitated for a moment, unsure of how to approach, but then, with a deep breath, he stepped forward and respectfully bowed. The monk opened his eyes slowly, as if he had been waiting for this moment. There was no rush in his movements, no sign of surprise. His face was serene, yet filled with a kind of knowing. He had seen countless seekers before, each carrying their own burdens, their own questions. "Master," the traveler said, his voice trembling slightly, "I have come to seek your wisdom. I have loved deeply, and yet I feel that love is slipping away. The one I hold dear is no longer the same. They have changed, and now there is distance between us. I do not know how to bridge that gap, nor how to deal with the pain of losing what once seemed eternal. What should I do?" The monk smiled gently, the corners of his mouth lifting slightly. "Ah, the pain of love, and the sorrow of loss. You are not alone in this, my friend. Love, like all things in this world, is impermanent. It comes and it goes, like the seasons of the earth, like the ebb and flow of the tides. But the pain you feel, the anxiety that grips your heart, it is not the love that has slipped away. It is your attachment to it, your expectation that it should remain unchanged, that has caused you suffering." The traveler sat down, his eyes wide with curiosity. "But, Master, if love is fleeting and impermanent, what is the point of loving at all? Why should I open my heart to something that will only be taken from me?" The monk's gaze softened, and he looked up at the sky for a moment, as if reflecting on the very question the traveler had asked. He then spoke, his voice calm and steady, "To love is to understand the nature of all things. The Buddha teaches us that everything in life is transient, nothing lasts forever. But it is this very impermanence that gives life its meaning. If love were permanent, it would lose its depth, its beauty. Just as a flower blooms in the spring and withers in the fall, so too does love appear, blossom, and fade." The traveler listened intently, his mind racing with questions. "But if love fades, does that mean that all love is destined to end in pain?" The monk chuckled softly, shaking his head. "No, my friend. Love does not end in pain unless we cling to it with attachment. Attachment is the root of suffering, as the Buddha taught in his Noble Truths. When we become attached to an idea of how things should be, we create expectations that can never be fulfilled. This attachment leads to frustration, disappointment, and suffering. But when we learn to let go of our expectations, when we learn to accept love as it is impermanent, changing, and free, we can experience it without suffering." The traveler frowned, still grappling with the concept. "But how can I let go of love? How can I stop wanting to hold on to the person I love, especially when they seem to be slipping away from me?" The monk looked at him with compassion. "To let go of attachment is not to stop loving, but to love without grasping. When you love without attachment, you allow the other person to be free. You accept them as they are, without trying to mold them into what you want them to be. You see them as a part of the world's impermanence, knowing that they, like you, are on a journey of change and growth." The traveler thought about this for a long time, and in the quiet stillness of the moment, something within him began to shift. The words of the monk, simple yet profound, began to settle into his heart. He realized that it wasn't the love he feared losing, it was the sense of control, the desire to possess and hold on to something that was never truly his to keep. The monk continued, "In the teachings of the Buddha, we are told that suffering arises from our attachment to the self, to our desires, to our expectations. But true freedom comes when we release these attachments. When we see the world as it truly is, impermanent, interconnected, and ever-changing, we can begin to live with a sense of peace and acceptance." The traveler took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the monk's words. "But how do I practice this in my daily life? How do I stop myself from clinging to love, to the past, to the way things once were? The monk nodded, his eyes filled with understanding. The practice of non-attachment is not something that can be learned overnight. It takes time, patience, and mindfulness. Start by observing your thoughts and feelings without judgment. Notice when you are grasping at something, when you are trying to hold onto a memory, a person, or an idea. In those moments, gently let go. Breathe deeply and return to the present moment. The past is gone, and the future has not yet come. All you have is this moment. The traveler sat in silence, absorbing the wisdom of the monk. He could feel the tension in his heart beginning to soften, the weight of his anxiety lifting. The monk's words were not a quick fix, but they offered him a path, a way to navigate the turbulence of love and loss with grace and acceptance. As the sun began to set, casting a warm glow over the temple, the monk rose from his seat and gestured for the traveler to follow him. They walked together through the grove, the soft rustle of leaves filling the air. The monk spoke again, his voice as calm as the breeze. Remember, my friend, that love is not something to be possessed. It is something to be experienced, appreciated, and shared. When we let go of the need to control it, when we accept it in all its forms, whether it remains or fades away, we can experience the deepest peace. The traveler nodded, feeling a sense of clarity he had not known before. He had come seeking answers, and now, in the quiet presence of the monk, he had found not just answers, but a new way of seeing the world, a way of seeing love not as something to hold on to, but as something to let go of, to cherish without attachment. In that moment, the traveler understood. Love, like all things in life, is a fleeting moment. It is precious not because it lasts forever, but because it exists at all. And in that understanding, there was freedom. As he left the temple and made his way back down the mountain, the traveler carried with him a newfound peace. He had learned to love without attachment, to accept the impermanence of life and love. And though he knew that loss would come again, he no longer feared it. For he understood that true love is not bound by time, but by the depth of the heart that embraces it fully, without expectation. As the traveler descended the mountain, he felt the cool evening breeze on his face, a gentle reminder that life, like the wind, is always in motion. And in that motion, there is beauty, there is love, and there is the wisdom of letting go. Expanding the story and Buddhist philosophy. To fully grasp the profound teachings imparted by the monk, let us explore the deeper concepts of Buddhist philosophy that illuminate the nature of love, attachment, and impermanence. The nature of love in Buddhism. Buddhism teaches that love is a natural, essential part of human existence. However, it also teaches that love, when driven by attachment, can lead to suffering. In Buddhist philosophy, attachment is the root cause of suffering, as we become bound by our desires, expectations, and the desire to possess what we hold dear. This attachment to love, be it romantic, familial, or even platonic, creates a false sense of security, as we cling to the idea that love should remain constant and unchanging. The Buddhist teachings on anicca, impermanence, remind us that everything in life is transient. The seasons change, relationships evolve, and people grow. To hold on to love with an expectation that it should never change is to misunderstand the very nature of existence. True love, in the Buddhist sense, is not about possession or control but about appreciating the present moment, being fully present with the one you love, and allowing them the freedom to grow, change, and evolve. The role of attachment and non-attachment. The key to finding peace in love and loss lies in understanding the nature of attachment. Attachment creates suffering by binding us to our desires and expectations. Non-attachment, on the other hand, is the path to freedom. Non-attachment does not mean that we do not care or love deeply. Rather, it means that we do not cling to the object of our love, nor do we create unrealistic expectations about how that love should unfold. In the story, the traveler's struggle to hold on to his love mirrors the human tendency to grasp at things, to try and make them permanent. The monk's teachings encourage the traveler to let go of this grasping, to accept the changing nature of life and love, and to find peace in the present moment. Through mindfulness and meditation, one can learn to observe their attachments without judgment, and gradually let them go, finding freedom in the process. The Buddhist practice of mindfulness and meditation. Mindfulness and meditation are central practices in Buddhism that help individuals cultivate non-attachment. By developing mindfulness, one can become more aware of their thoughts and feelings, noticing when they are attached to something or someone, and gently letting go of that attachment. Through meditation, one learns to quiet the mind and return to the present moment, where love, like all things, exists without the need for clinging. In the traveler's journey, his encounter with the monk and the peaceful environment of the temple allowed him to connect with his inner self. This moment of stillness was key to his transformation. Similarly, meditation can help anyone in the throes of loss or attachment to find clarity and peace. The science of attachment and letting go. From a scientific perspective, attachment theory suggests that humans have an innate need to form close emotional bonds. However, when these bonds are broken or threatened, it can lead to feelings of anxiety, fear, and sadness. The science of attachment aligns with Buddhist teachings in many ways, particularly in understanding how attachment can lead to emotional suffering. Just as the Buddha taught that attachment creates suffering, modern psychology acknowledges the emotional turmoil that comes with the inability to let go of attachments. Yet, the science of emotional resilience and well-being also points to the benefits of letting go. Studies show that practicing mindfulness and non-attachment can lead to improved mental health, greater emotional regulation, and a deeper sense of peace. The path to wisdom and inner peace. In the end, the traveler's journey teaches us a fundamental truth: love is not something we can control or possess, but something to experience and cherish in its fleeting beauty. By letting go of attachment, we allow ourselves to experience love more fully, without the fear of losing it. Through mindfulness, meditation, and the practice of non-attachment, we can transform our approach to love, relationships, and life itself. The teachings of the Buddha offer a path to inner peace, showing us that by embracing impermanence and letting go of our attachments, we can live a life filled with compassion, wisdom, and serenity. Just as the traveler found peace on his journey, so too can we, when we learn to love without clinging and to accept the ebb and flow of life. 2. Withdrawal, a sign of fading love. As the traveler sat by the small pond, his gaze drifting to the monk's calm face, he pondered the monk's words. The idea that love could fade gradually like a tide receding resonated deeply within him. He felt as though a veil had been lifted from his eyes, revealing a truth he had always known but never fully acknowledged. It was a truth about impermanence, the very essence of life itself, which is the heart of Buddhist philosophy. The traveler, while still grappling with his emotions, could not help but sense that the monk was guiding him to a deeper understanding, one that might not only explain love, but also how to navigate its inevitable fading with grace. The monk had told him that love, like the tide, recedes slowly, and that withdrawal is not an overt action, but a silent shift that happens within the hearts of those involved. "Why not just tell me?" the traveler had asked, and the monk's answer had illuminated a profound aspect of human nature. That the act of withdrawing is not always a conscious decision but rather a response to a deeper, unspoken shift. The nature of this withdrawal, though subtle, is laden with meaning, and it carries within it the seeds of both suffering and wisdom. At this point, the monk rose from the stone bench, his robes fluttering like soft whispers of wind. He gestured for the traveler to follow him as they walked along the garden path, each step soundless in the quiet afternoon. As they walked, the monk spoke once again. "You see, my friend, love does not simply disappear, but rather, it transforms. It is like the fading light of dusk. The sun does not suddenly vanish from the sky, but gently recedes behind the horizon. The same is true of the heart." The traveler, still reflecting on the monk's words, nodded in acknowledgement but found himself struggling to reconcile this idea with the pain he had been feeling. The monk, sensing the traveler's inner turmoil, continued, "The challenge is not in the fading of love itself, but in how we respond to it. This is where suffering arises." The monk's words hung in the air like the faintest trace of a melody, soft but profound. The traveler was beginning to understand that the true nature of love's withdrawal lies not in the love itself, but in the attachment to it, the desire to hold on to something that is naturally meant to change and evolve. The pain comes not from the absence of love, but from the refusal to accept its impermanence. In Buddhist philosophy, attachment is often seen as the root of suffering. We cling to things, be it people, objects, or experiences, because we wish for them to stay, to remain unchanged. However, change is the only constant in the universe. Just as the tide recedes and the sun sets, love, too, will inevitably shift. This is not a reason for despair, but rather a call to cultivate the wisdom of non-attachment. Non-attachment, or upekkha in Pali, is a central concept in Buddhism. It refers to the ability to experience life without clinging to it, to love deeply without trying to possess or control. When we are attached, we bind ourselves to the idea that things must remain as they are, that they must stay fixed in time. This creates a constant tension within us, a fear of loss that leads to anxiety and pain. The Buddha teaches us that true freedom comes not from holding on to what we love, but from letting go and accepting the transient nature of all things. The monk continued, "When we learn to love without attachment, we free ourselves from the burden of expecting things to remain the same. We can love fully, deeply, and without fear of loss. We can experience the fullness of love in each moment, knowing that it will change. But that change is not something to be feared. It is simply a part of the natural order." The traveler listened intently, the seeds of understanding beginning to take root in his heart. "So, you are saying that the pain I feel from this gradual withdrawal is not because love has disappeared, but because I am trying to hold on to something that is meant to change?" "Yes," the monk replied softly, his gaze unwavering. "The pain you feel is born from your attachment to the idea of love as something fixed, something permanent. But love, like all things, is impermanent. When we stop holding on to it, when we allow it to flow freely, we can experience it in a more profound way." The traveler's heart began to soften as he realized the truth in the monk's words. He had been so focused on the fear of losing love, so wrapped up in the idea that love should remain as it was, that he had not allowed himself to truly appreciate it in the present moment. His anxiety had prevented him from seeing the love that was still there, even as it began to fade. The monk led the traveler to a small clearing in the garden, where a pool of still water reflected the clear sky above. The surface of the water was perfectly smooth, undisturbed by wind or movement. The monk stood silently for a moment, gazing at the water, then spoke again. "See this water?" the monk said, pointing to the surface of the pool. "It is calm, still, and clear. But if you throw a stone into it, what happens?" The traveler watched as the monk tossed a small pebble into the pool. The surface rippled, and for a brief moment, the water became disturbed. The ripples spread outward, creating waves that reached the edges of the pool before slowly fading back into stillness. Just like this water, the monk continued, love can be disturbed by our attachments. We throw our desires and expectations into the stillness of the heart, and it creates ripples, anxiety, fear, sorrow. But when we let go, when we stop throwing stones into the water, the ripples fade and the water becomes still again. The traveler understood the analogy. His heart, like the water, had been disturbed by his own attachments, the fear of losing love, the desire to control it, the hope that it would remain unchanged. But now, he saw that if he could let go of these attachments, his heart could return to its natural stillness, its natural peace. The ripples of anxiety could fade, and he could simply be present with the love that was still there, without clinging to it. The monk smiled at the traveler's realization. The teachings of the Buddha are simple, yet profound. They remind us that suffering arises from our attachment to things, our desire for permanence in a world that is ever-changing. But when we cultivate mindfulness and non-attachment, we can live with a deep sense of peace and freedom. We can love fully, without fear, without grasping, and without expectation. We can love in the present moment, knowing that the love we feel now is just as beautiful, just as precious, as the love we may lose in the future. The traveler nodded, a sense of calm beginning to settle over him. He understood now that the fading of love, though painful, was a natural part of life. The love he had experienced was not lost, it had simply changed, as all things do. And in letting go of his attachment to it, he could free himself from the pain of loss and open his heart to new experiences of love, without fear or expectation. The monk's teachings had touched something deep within him, something that transcended the pain of his current situation. The idea of non-attachment, of loving without clinging, was not just a way to cope with the fading of love. It was a path to freedom, a way to experience life with greater clarity, peace, and joy. As they walked back to the temple, the traveler felt a sense of lightness in his heart. He had come to seek answers to the fading of love. But he had found something even more valuable. The wisdom of impermanence, the freedom of non-attachment, and the peace that comes from accepting the ever-changing nature of life. And with that understanding, he felt a deeper connection to himself, to others, and to the world around him. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows over the garden, the traveler looked up at the sky, a sense of gratitude rising within him. He had learned that love, like all things, is impermanent. But that impermanence did not make love any less precious. It only made it more beautiful, more meaningful, because it is fleeting, because it is here for a moment and then gone. And in that moment, there is all the love, all the joy, and all the wisdom we need. The Buddhist perspective on love and impermanence. Buddhism teaches that everything in the universe is impermanent, anicca, including love. The Buddhist teachings emphasize that attachment to anything, whether it's people, possessions, or experiences, leads to suffering. This is because our attachments are based on the illusion that things can remain fixed, that they are permanent. In reality, everything changes, and this constant change is the very nature of existence. Love, in Buddhist thought, is not something to be possessed or clung to. Love is something to be experienced in the present moment, with an open heart, without attachment. The Buddha taught that when we can love without clinging, without trying to control or possess, we are free from the pain that comes with attachment. This is true freedom, the ability to love fully, without fear of loss, without grasping, and without expectation. The fading of love, then, is not a tragedy. It is simply another aspect of the impermanence of life. By accepting this impermanence, we can move beyond the pain of loss and open ourselves to new forms of love and connection. In this way, love becomes a source of peace, rather than a cause of suffering. Science and attachment. Psychologically, attachment is a powerful force that shapes our relationships and emotional well-being. Attachment theory, developed by John Bowlby and Mary Ainsworth, suggests that humans are biologically predisposed to form emotional bonds with others. These bonds provide security and a sense of connection. However, when these bonds are threatened when love fades or is lost, it can lead to emotional distress. Studies have shown that attachment is linked to both positive and negative emotional experiences. When we are securely attached, we feel safe, supported, and loved. But when our attachments are disrupted, it can lead to anxiety, sadness, and even depression. This aligns with the Buddhist understanding of attachment as the root of suffering. Yet, just as Buddhism teaches that letting go of attachment leads to freedom, psychological research supports the idea that developing emotional resilience and practicing mindfulness can help individuals cope with the loss of attachment. By learning to observe our emotions without judgment and letting go of our need to control or possess, we can experience emotional freedom and peace. Practical steps to cultivate non-attachment. The practice of non-attachment does not mean that we stop loving or caring for others. It simply means that we stop trying to control or possess the things we love. In practical terms, this can be achieved through mindfulness, meditation, and cultivating awareness of our attachments. 1. Mindfulness. Pay attention to your thoughts and feelings without judgment. Notice when you are becoming attached to a person, an outcome, or a situation. When you recognize attachment, gently let it go, and return to the present moment. 2. Meditation. Meditation helps cultivate awareness and mindfulness. By practicing meditation regularly, we can learn to observe our thoughts and emotions without becoming attached to them. This helps create space between our experiences and our reactions, allowing us to let go of attachment more easily. 3. Acceptance. Accept the impermanence of life. Understand that all things, love included, are transient. By accepting this truth, we can stop clinging to the past and open ourselves to the beauty of the present moment. Conclusion. In the story of the fading love, the monk's teachings about non-attachment offer a profound lesson. Love is impermanent, and the fading of love is a natural part of life. By learning to love without attachment, we can experience love more fully and with greater peace. The key to this is accepting the impermanence of life and letting go of our desire to control or possess. This allows us to experience the full depth of love without fear of loss, and to live with greater freedom and joy. 3. Transformation. The person you loved is no longer the same. The traveler's heart was heavy, burdened with the weight of the monk's words. The notion that love fades like the retreating tide, gradually, subtly, and almost imperceptibly, had already begun to sink in. But as he walked deeper into the serene garden, a new thought began to stir in his mind. If love fades, as the monk said, then what about the person you loved? What happens when they become someone unrecognizable? How do you cope with the change when the very essence of the person you cherished no longer exists? He turned to the monk, his voice tinged with curiosity. What about the second sign? What else happens when love fades? The monk's face remained calm, but there was a glimmer of understanding in his eyes, as if he had anticipated this question. Without responding immediately, the monk led the traveler further into the garden, his steps slow and deliberate, like the quiet rhythm of nature itself. The air was filled with the scent of earth, flowers, and the faint murmur of distant birds. The traveler, though lost in thought, followed the monk as they approached a small, still pond. It was a perfect mirror to the world above, a clear, tranquil reflection of the sky, the trees, and the garden that surrounded them. "Look into the water," the monk said gently, pointing to the pond's surface. "What do you see?" The traveler leaned over the water, his gaze fixed on the reflection. It was him, without a doubt, his features, his familiar face. But as he stared deeper, something felt off, as though there was something just beyond his comprehension, some subtle shift he could not quite place. The reflection, though accurate, seemed somehow different, as if an unseen force was distorting it just enough to unsettle him. Suddenly, without warning, the monk picked up a small stone from the ground and dropped it gently into the water. The surface rippled immediately, the once clear reflection now broken and distorted by the movement of the water. The monk turned to the traveler and said, "Now, look again. What do you see?" The traveler's eyes followed the ripples that spread out across the pond. His own reflection had changed, it was no longer clear. The image, which had once been familiar and comforting, was now fragmented and indistinct. The edges of his face were blurred, and the lines seemed to shift with each ripple. It was as though the water had altered his very essence, making him appear unfamiliar, even foreign to himself. He looked at the monk in confusion, his heart heavy with a new realization. "But this is not me. This is different." The monk nodded slowly, his expression unwavering, but his voice was soft, almost as if he were speaking a truth known only to the wisest hearts. "This is what happens when love fades. When someone loses their love for you, it's not just their presence that withdraws. The very essence of who they are changes. The person you once knew, the one who understood your heart, is no longer the same. They may look the same, but their heart, their soul, has shifted. What you once cherished is now gone, replaced by someone different." The traveler stood in silence, the weight of the monk's words settling upon him like a gentle, but unavoidable truth. He looked again into the pond, watching the ripples fade and the water return to stillness. The image of himself began to sharpen once more, but now, it seemed different. His own reflection no longer seemed to carry the same warmth it had before. It was as if a part of him had also shifted, and he was no longer entirely the same. The monk, sensing the depth of the traveler's thoughts, continued. "This change in the person you loved is not something that happens overnight. It begins gradually, like the ripples in the pond. At first, you may not even notice it. But over time, the ripples grow, the changes become more pronounced, and you are left with a person who feels unfamiliar, distant. Their words no longer resonate with the same affection, their touch no longer brings warmth. The bond you once shared begins to unravel, and you are left with the haunting feeling that the person you loved is no longer there." The traveler's mind raced with a torrent of emotions: confusion, sorrow, even anger. "But why?" he asked, his voice breaking. "Why does it have to be this way? Why does someone change in this way? Why can't they just be honest with me? Why must they drift away like this, becoming someone else entirely?" The monk turned his gaze to the sky, where the sun hung low, casting a warm, golden glow over the garden. He stood there for a moment, silent, as though contemplating a question that had been asked countless times before. Then, in a voice as serene as the quiet pond, he spoke, "It is not that they do not want to be honest with you. It is that they do not fully understand what has happened within themselves. When love fades, it is not always a conscious decision. It is a slow, almost imperceptible transformation. They may not even realize that their heart has moved on, that their feelings have shifted, until the distance between you becomes too great to ignore. The monk paused, allowing the traveler to absorb his words before continuing. This is the nature of impermanence, the very foundation of the Buddha's teachings. Everything changes: our feelings, our relationships, even our identities. We cannot hold on to anything forever. The person you once loved, the one who once knew your heart, is just as impermanent as everything else. Love is not something that can be possessed, nor is it something that remains fixed. It flows, it changes, and it transforms, just as everything else in this world does. The traveler looked up, his mind still struggling to fully comprehend the depths of what the monk had said. But if love is impermanent, then why do we feel so much pain when it changes, when it fades? The monk turned toward the traveler, his eyes kind but filled with deep wisdom. The pain you feel is not because love has changed or faded. The pain comes from your attachment to the idea of love as something permanent, something that should stay the same. You have become attached to the image of the person you loved, and when they change, you feel as though a part of you is lost. But what you must understand is that attachment is the cause of suffering. When we hold on too tightly to something, we set ourselves up for pain when it inevitably changes. True peace comes from accepting the impermanence of love, from allowing it to flow freely without trying to control or possess it. The traveler stood still, reflecting on the monk's words. His heart felt heavy, but also strangely light, as though the truth of impermanence had begun to sink in. He understood now that the pain of losing love was not just about the love itself, but about the expectations and attachments he had placed on it. By holding on too tightly, he had created his own suffering. And yet, as he thought more deeply, he realized that understanding this truth was not enough to ease his pain. The change in the person he had loved, the fact that they were no longer the same, was a loss in and of itself. How could he let go of that? How could he accept that the person who once understood him, who once loved him, was now a stranger? The monk seemed to sense the traveler's struggle and continued, "The process of transformation is not always easy to accept. We often cling to the past, to the way things were, because it gives us a sense of security. But in doing so, we miss the beauty of the present moment, the beauty of the love that is still there, even if it has changed. If you can learn to let go of your attachment to the past, to the person you once loved, you will find that you can still love them in the present, even if they are no longer the same. Love is not about holding on to an image of the past, but about accepting the present as it is." The traveler listened intently, his heart slowly beginning to understand. The pain he felt was not just about the loss of the person he had loved, but about his inability to accept that they had changed, that love itself was fluid and impermanent. "So, you're saying that I need to let go of the person I thought they were, and love them as they are now?" "Yes," the monk replied softly. "And in doing so, you will find that your heart can remain open, free from the pain of attachment. When we cling to something, we only create suffering. But when we accept things as they are, when we let go of our need to control or possess, we can love freely, without fear, without expectations, and without pain." The traveler stood there, gazing at the still pond, the ripples of the monk's words sinking deep into his heart. He felt a sense of peace beginning to replace the turmoil inside him. He understood now that the person he had loved was not gone forever, but had simply changed, as all things do. And if he could learn to let go of the attachment to who they once were, he could learn to love them as they were now, no longer a stranger, but someone still worthy of his love. As the monk turned to leave, the traveler followed, his heart filled with gratitude for the wisdom he had received. He understood now that love was not something to possess or hold onto. but something to experience, to embrace, and to let go of when the time was right. And in that acceptance, he could find peace, knowing that love, like all things, is impermanent, and that is what makes it so precious. Expanding the Buddhist perspective on love and impermanence. Buddhism teaches that all things in life are impermanent, nothing lasts forever, including love. The Buddhist teachings on impermanence, or anicca, remind us that everything is in a constant state of flux. This includes not only the external world but also our internal experiences, our emotions, and our relationships. The people we love, the feelings we have for them, and even our own identities are subject to change. In this context, love is not something that is fixed or eternal. It is a dynamic force that evolves, shifts, and transforms over time. The Buddhist concept of impermanence challenges the common belief that love is something that can be possessed or held onto forever. Instead, love is seen as a natural, ever-changing process that reflects the truth of the universe itself. The story of the traveler and the monk highlights the painful reality that when love fades, it is not just the physical presence of the person that withdraws, but the very essence of who they are. The person you once knew is no longer the same. This shift can be unsettling, even painful, because it forces us to confront the impermanence of our most cherished relationships. But in accepting this impermanence, we can find the freedom to love without attachment, without expectation, and without fear. In the Buddhist tradition, attachment is seen as the root cause of suffering. When we become attached to someone or something, we create an illusion of permanence. We believe that the object of our attachment will remain the same. But this is not the nature of the world. All things change, and when we cling to something that is destined to change, we set ourselves up for suffering. Buddhist teachings encourage us to cultivate non-attachment, which is not the same as not caring or not loving. Non-attachment means loving freely, without clinging, without trying to possess or control. It means accepting the impermanence of all things and embracing the present moment without fear of loss. In doing so, we can experience love in its purest form, free from the pain of attachment and the fear of change. The process of letting go of attachment can be challenging, especially when it involves someone we love deeply. However, Buddhism offers a path to freedom through mindfulness and meditation. By cultivating awareness of our thoughts and emotions, we can learn to recognize when we are becoming attached to someone or something. And we can gently let go of that attachment. This practice of non-attachment allows us to experience love without fear, without control, and without suffering. Through this practice, we can learn to accept the changes in our relationships and in ourselves, knowing that everything in life is impermanent. In this acceptance, we find peace, and in this peace, we can continue to love without fear, without expectation, and without pain. Conclusion. The story of love fading and the person you once loved becoming unrecognizable offers a profound insight into the Buddhist perspective on impermanence. Love, like all things, is subject to change. When we hold on to the image of the person we loved, we create suffering. But when we learn to accept the impermanence of love and release our attachments, we can find peace and continue to love freely, without fear or expectation. The teachings of the Buddha offer a path to freedom, allowing us to love without clinging and to find joy in the fleeting moments of life. 4 lessons on acceptance and letting go. The traveler sat in silence, staring at the pond in front of him, the ripples still lingering on the surface from the stones that had been cast in it earlier. His heart was heavy, filled with a deep sadness that he could not shake. He had been questioning the nature of love, loss, and impermanence since he had first arrived at the monastery. The monk's words had resonated within him, but now, standing on the precipice of his own emotional turmoil, he found himself drowning in uncertainty. What should I do then? How can I endure this loss? The traveler asked, his voice breaking under the weight of his grief. His hands trembled as he reached up to wipe away the tears that had begun to fall once again. The monk, standing beside him, did not speak immediately. He seemed to be waiting, allowing the traveler to feel his emotions fully. In that stillness, the monk's calm presence seemed to embrace him, offering a space for the storm of his feelings to subside. Finally, the monk spoke, his voice gentle but firm. You do nothing. You accept. The traveler's brow furrowed in confusion, his heart aching even more as the words seemed to land heavily upon him. Accept, he repeated, almost incredulously. How can I accept this? How can I simply accept that love is gone, that the person I loved is no longer the same? The monk smiled, his gaze soft yet penetrating, as though he could see into the very depths of the traveler's soul. Yes, he said, accept that all things change. Accept that love, like the seasons, must shift. Do not chase after what is already leaving, and do not mourn what has already transformed. Instead, be still, like the pond when the ripples fade, and you will see the truth. The traveler felt as though the words were wrapping themselves around him like a comforting embrace, but there was still a lingering resistance in his heart. He turned to the monk, seeking further clarity, his voice a whisper. What is the truth? The monk's smile deepened, his eyes filled with the kind of understanding that only comes from a deep, inner peace. The truth is that love does not belong to you. It never did. It flows through you, visits you, changes you, but it is not yours to possess. When love leaves, do not grasp at it. Instead, bow to it. Thank it for its time in your life, and let it go like the last leaf falling in autumn. The traveler stood still, his mind struggling to grasp the weight of the monk's words. His thoughts swirled like the ripples on the pond's surface, confusion, pain, and a sense of finality clashing with a quiet recognition that this moment, like the monk said, held a deeper truth. Slowly, as he gazed at the pond once more, the water seemed to calm, the ripples fading one by one, until all that remained was stillness. The traveler felt his own emotions begin to settle, as though the water in his heart, too, was returning to stillness. He wiped away his tears and looked at the monk. For the first time in days, he felt a flicker of peace within him. I understand now, the traveler said, his voice still soft but steadier. Love is not a possession. It is a guest. The monk nodded, his expression serene. Yes. Love comes to us, stays for a time, and then leaves. It is not something that can be held onto forever. We are blessed with its presence for as long as it stays. But when it goes, we must not lock the door behind it. We must bow to it and let it pass, just as we would bow to the falling leaf in autumn. The traveler felt the weight of the monk's wisdom sink deep into his heart. He had always believed that love was something to be possessed, something to be held tightly. The idea that love was a guest, transient and free, was both comforting and liberating. He understood now that the pain he felt was not because love had left, but because he had tried to hold onto it, to make it permanent. In doing so, he had created his own suffering. But now, as he stood there with the monk, he felt a shift within him. He could let go. He could allow love to pass, without fear or regret. The monk spoke again, his voice like a gentle breeze, carrying wisdom that had been passed down through the ages. You must understand that all things in life are impermanent. Love, like everything else, is subject to change. This is not a reason for despair, but a reason for gratitude. When we accept the impermanence of love, we free ourselves from the chains of attachment. We can love deeply, fully, without fear of loss, because we know that love is not meant to last forever, it is meant to be experienced in the present moment, fully, and without clinging. The traveler nodded, his heart feeling lighter with each passing word. He understood that the pain of loss was not a reflection of love's absence, but a reflection of his attachment to it. By letting go of that attachment, he could experience love in its purest form, without the fear of losing it. He could love with open hands, not clenched fists. The monk's teachings had given him a new perspective, a new way to approach love and loss with grace. But as the monk spoke, the traveler's mind wandered briefly, and he asked a question that had been lingering in his heart. But what about the person I loved? How do I deal with the fact that they have changed, that they are no longer the person I once knew? How do I accept that transformation? The monk's eyes deepened with wisdom as he looked at the traveler, as though he had already anticipated this question. The person you loved was never a fixed, unchanging being. They, too, are subject to the same impermanence that governs all things. They have changed, just as you have changed. The challenge is not in accepting their transformation, but in accepting your own. When you let go of your attachment to the past version of them, you allow yourself to see them as they are now, in the present moment. And when you can do that, you will see that love can still flow between you, even if it is no longer the same as it once was. The traveler took a deep breath, feeling a sense of release in his chest. He had been holding on to the past version of the person he loved, hoping that they would return to what they once were. But now, he saw that the true challenge lay not in trying to bring back the past, but in accepting the person for who they were in the present. Love, in this moment, could still be present, even if it looked different. You see, the monk continued, the more we resist change, the more we suffer. But when we accept the flow of life, the ebb and tide of love, we become like the pond. Still, calm, and open to whatever comes, without clinging or pushing away. This is the path to peace. The traveler, now standing with the monk in the quiet of the garden, felt a deep sense of relief wash over him. The weight of his grief had not disappeared, but he now understood that it was not something to fight against. It was a natural part of life, a part of love's journey. The more he fought to hold on to the past, the more he would suffer. But when he learned to accept and let go, he would find peace, just as the pond found peace when the ripples faded. The monk's words lingered in the air, their meaning sinking deep into the traveler's heart. He understood now that love was not a possession, nor something to be held onto at all costs. It was a visitor, a fleeting guest that brought joy, transformation, and sometimes pain. But rather than clinging to it, he could welcome it, experience it fully, and then let it go, with gratitude and grace. As the traveler stood in the garden, he felt the last of his sadness begin to dissipate. His heart, once heavy with attachment, now felt lighter. He had learned the greatest lesson of all, to accept, to let go, and to embrace love as it came, without fear, without regret, and without the need to possess it. In this stillness, he found peace. Buddhist teachings on acceptance and impermanence. The teachings of Buddhism, particularly around the concepts of acceptance and impermanence, offer profound insight into how we can navigate the challenges of life, especially in the face of loss. According to the Buddha, all things are impermanent. This includes love, relationships, and even our own lives. The Buddha's teachings on impermanence, anicca, remind us that everything is in a constant state of change. When we accept this reality, we can release our attachments and open ourselves to the beauty of life, just as it is. In Buddhism, attachment is seen as the root cause of suffering. We attach ourselves to people, things, and experiences, hoping they will remain fixed and unchanging. But when they inevitably change, we experience pain, sorrow, and loss. By cultivating non-attachment, we can learn to accept the ebb and flow of life without clinging to any particular moment or outcome. The practice of mindfulness and meditation can help us cultivate this non-attachment. By being present in each moment and observing our thoughts and feelings without judgment, we can learn to let go of our attachments and experience life with greater clarity and peace. This doesn't mean that we stop loving or caring, rather, it means that we love without the need to possess or control. In this way, we can live with greater freedom, appreciating love as a precious gift that comes and goes, rather than something we can hold onto forever. Through acceptance and the practice of non-attachment, we can find peace in the impermanence of love and life itself. B. Final reflections. As the traveler continued his journey, the teachings of the monk settled deeper into his heart. The words about the falling leaves and the impermanence of love had sparked something within him. But it wasn't until he walked further along the path that he truly understood the depth of their meaning. With each step, the weight of his grief seemed to lighten, transforming into something softer. Something he could carry without feeling overwhelmed. He did not forget the loss he had experienced. But now it felt less like a burden that could break him and more like an experience that had shaped him. The pain of love's departure had not disappeared. He still missed the person he once loved, still longed for the connection they shared. Yet, the true shift occurred not in the pain itself, but in the way the traveler viewed love. He had once thought of love as something to be kept, something that could belong to him, something to be protected and preserved. But now, under the guidance of the monk's teachings, he saw love differently. It was no longer a possession. It was a river that flowed through him, a bird that visited and then flew away, a season that bloomed and then withered. Love, like everything else, was impermanent, and in this realization, the traveler found a new sense of freedom. In Zen Buddhism, suffering arises when we grasp at things that are by their nature fleeting. We live in a world that is constantly in motion, constantly changing. And yet, we hold on to the idea that certain things, especially love, should be permanent. We seek security and stability in a realm where everything moves, shifts, and dissolves. This yearning for permanence in a world of impermanence is the root cause of much of our suffering. And when we lose something, like love, that we have clung to so tightly, the pain is immense because we believe that we have lost something that should have lasted forever. But in truth, the monk's wisdom revealed a deeper understanding. Love was never ours to lose. It was never a possession in the first place. We are mere vessels for love, and it flows through us like a river, passing by, moving on, and changing shape as it continues its course. The traveler now understood that the pain he felt came not from love's departure, but from his attachment to it. He had been holding on to something that was never his to keep. This realization was liberating. It allowed him to breathe more freely, to move through his grief with more ease. The monk had also spoken of two signs that occur when love fades: the withdrawal of presence and the transformation of the loved one into someone else. These signs were not signs of betrayal or cruelty. They were simply the natural unfolding of impermanence in relationships. When someone withdraws their presence, it is not an act of abandonment. Rather, it is the manifestation of the truth that love has changed. The person you once knew, the one who once shared your heart, has transformed, and in this transformation, their presence no longer feels the same. This is not a rejection of you, it is the simple reality of change. Similarly, when someone becomes someone else, it is not because they have chosen to hurt you. They are simply evolving, just as you are. Relationships, like all things, are subject to change. We are not the same people we were yesterday, and neither are those we love. People grow, they evolve, they shift, and love, too, shifts with them. The traveler, in his journey, began to understand that he had been clinging not only to the love he had once shared, but to the person that his loved one used to be. And in doing so, he had set himself up for pain. The Zen perspective on this transformation is crucial. In Zen Buddhism, we are taught that all things, people, experiences, love are impermanent. The idea of clinging to something that is fleeting goes against the very nature of life. This is why loss, whether it is the loss of a person, a relationship, or love itself, is so painful. We hold on to the idea that things should remain the same, that love should never fade, that the people we care about should never change. But this is not the way of the world. Change is constant. It is inevitable. And in that inevitability lies both suffering and liberation. One of the greatest challenges in dealing with the impermanence of love is learning to let go without bitterness, resentment, or anger. Buddhist wisdom teaches that resentment is like holding a hot coal with the intention of throwing it at someone else. You are the one who gets burned. When we hold on to resentment, we carry the burden of it, and it causes suffering not to the person we are angry at, but to ourselves. This is why forgiveness is such an essential part of the Buddhist path. Forgiveness is not about letting the other person off the hook. It is about freeing ourselves from the suffering of anger, resentment, and attachment. The traveler, in his own journey, found this truth to be deeply profound. He had been carrying the hot coal of anger for so long, holding on to the belief that the person who had changed had wronged him, had abandoned him. But in releasing this resentment, he found that he could breathe more easily. He could let go of the past and accept the impermanence of love. He no longer needed to hold on to the idea that things should have been different. He could allow himself to feel the pain of love's departure. But he no longer had to let it control him. He could let it pass, just as love itself had passed through his life. The act of letting go, as the monk had taught him, was not about forgetting. It was not about erasing the love he had once shared or denying the pain of its departure. It was about releasing his attachment to the idea that love should remain forever, that it should stay fixed in time. It was about accepting that love, like everything else, is a process, a flow, a movement, a transformation. And in accepting that transformation, the traveler found peace. In Buddhism, there is a deep recognition that everything is interconnected. We are not isolated beings, but part of a vast web of existence. Our relationships, our experiences, and even our emotions are interconnected with the world around us. When we cling to things, when we try to possess them, we disrupt this natural flow. But when we learn to let go, we allow the natural flow of life to move through us. We align ourselves with the rhythms of the universe, and in doing so, we find peace. The traveler, in his understanding of impermanence, found a new sense of freedom. Love was no longer something to possess, something to hold onto with fear and desperation. It was something to experience, to appreciate, and to let go of when the time came. He could love deeply, without the fear of losing it. He could love fully, without the need to control or possess. And in doing so, he could experience life with greater peace, knowing that love, like all things, would come and go. The lesson of impermanence had, at last, sunk deep into the traveler's heart. The monk's teachings had guided him to a place of understanding. But it was the experience of walking the path, of living with the truth of impermanence, that truly brought him peace. The traveler had come seeking answers, seeking to understand why love had to fade, why the people he loved had to change. But in the end, he found something far more profound, the freedom that comes from accepting change, from letting go, and from embracing life as it is, impermanent, fleeting, and beautiful in its transience. As the traveler continued along the path, his heart was lighter. The pain of loss had not disappeared, but it no longer had the power to control him. He understood that love, like everything else, would come and go. And in that understanding, he found peace. Buddhist teachings on acceptance and letting go. Buddhism teaches us that everything in life is impermanent. This truth, often referred to as anicca, is one of the three marks of existence, along with suffering, dukkha, and non-self, anatta. The impermanence of all things is central to the Buddhist path, and it is the root cause of suffering when we fail to accept it. Attachment to things, people, and experiences is the cause of much of our pain because we believe that things should remain fixed, unchanging, and permanent. But life does not work this way. By understanding and embracing impermanence, we free ourselves from the suffering that arises from our attachments. The practice of mindfulness and meditation helps us to become more aware of our attachments and to let go of them. This process is not about rejecting love or relationships. It is about understanding them as they are transient, changing, and impermanent. By letting go of our attachment to the idea that things should remain the same, we allow ourselves to experience them more fully, without the fear of loss or change. The path of acceptance and letting go is not easy, but it is the key to freedom. By releasing our attachment to the past, to love, and to people, we can find peace in the present moment. We can love deeply, fully, and without fear. And in doing so, we align ourselves with the natural flow of life, finding peace in the ever-changing, impermanent world around us. 6. How to let go without bitterness. The journey to letting go of love, when it is no longer meant to stay, is one of the most profound teachings in the Buddhist tradition. The path to releasing love without bitterness requires an understanding of impermanence, non-attachment, and compassion for oneself. It is not simply about letting go of a person or a relationship, but about shifting the perspective from possessiveness and clinging to an acceptance of change and a deeper love for oneself. In Buddhist philosophy, we are taught that attachment to things, people, and even emotions is the root of suffering. The more tightly we hold on to something, the more we suffer when it changes or fades away. Understanding how to release love without bitterness is an essential part of cultivating inner peace and wisdom. To release love without bitterness, we must first learn to honor what was. In the case of love, this means remembering the beauty of the love that once existed, instead of focusing solely on the pain of loss. When we find ourselves in the aftermath of a fading relationship or a love that no longer wishes to stay, it can be easy to become consumed by grief, sorrow, and a sense of personal failure. We may start to question ourselves, wondering what went wrong, or why things changed. But in Buddhist practice, we are taught that focusing on loss perpetuates suffering. Instead of fixating on the pain of losing something, we must turn our attention to the joy and beauty that love brought into our lives. Love, like all things, is impermanent, and to truly honor it is to accept it as a transient experience rather than something that was meant to last forever. The Buddha teaches us that nothing in this world is permanent, neither our experiences nor the people we love. When we attach ourselves too strongly to the idea of permanence, we set ourselves up for disappointment and pain. However, when we accept impermanence, we can experience love for what it was without the heavy burden of expectation. We honor the love that once existed by appreciating the memories and lessons it gave us rather than clinging to it as though it were ours to keep. Love, like a beautiful sunset, is fleeting, but the beauty it leaves behind is everlasting in our hearts. In honoring what was, we begin to release the grip that loss has on us, allowing ourselves to move forward with grace. The second step in letting go of love without bitterness is learning not to chase the bird. In Buddhist teachings, there is a profound understanding that chasing after what is leaving only prolongs our suffering. When someone withdraws their love, when a relationship fades, or when we feel that a bond has loosened, the natural impulse may be to chase after it, to try to hold on, to keep things as they were. However, the more we chase something that wishes to leave, the more we trap ourselves in a cycle of desire and frustration. The Buddha taught that desire, rooted in attachment, is a primary cause of suffering. When we desire something, we create an attachment to it, and when we are unable to obtain it or when it changes, we experience pain. In relationships, this chasing can manifest in various ways, trying to rekindle feelings that no longer exist, holding on to memories of someone who has moved on, or constantly seeking validation from someone who has withdrawn their affection. Chasing love in this way creates a loop of longing and unfulfilled desire. The more we chase, the more we fuel our own suffering. The Buddha, in his teachings, speaks of the importance of letting go of attachments and desires in order to attain inner peace. Just as we cannot hold onto a bird that has flown away, we cannot hold onto a love that is no longer present. The act of chasing only deepens the wound. The act of letting go, however, offers healing. Releasing attachment is perhaps the most challenging yet liberating step in letting go of love without bitterness. Buddhism teaches that attachment is the root of all suffering. Our attachment to people, things, and even emotions creates a sense of ownership and control that is at odds with the natural flow of life. To love without attachment is to love without the need to possess, to control, or to cling. In many ways, attachment distorts love. We begin to see the other person not as they truly are, but as a possession, a part of our identity, our security, or our happiness. We become dependent on their presence, their affection, and their behavior, and when that is taken away, we feel as though a part of ourselves is lost. However, love does not need to be tied to possession. We can love someone deeply and still let them go. True love, in the Buddhist sense, is selfless. It is about wishing the other person well, even if it means their happiness no longer involves us. This selfless love is the key to letting go without bitterness. When we release attachment to the idea that love must stay with us, we free ourselves from the chains of possessiveness. The monk's teachings on love as a river, a bird, and a season remind us that love is meant to flow freely. It is a natural force that we are blessed to experience for as long as it stays with us, but it does not belong to us. When we love without attachment, we can appreciate the love that was given without clinging to it or demanding its permanence. The Buddha's teachings also emphasize the importance of compassion and kindness in the process of letting go. When we release someone from our lives, whether it is through the end of a romantic relationship or the fading of affection, we can do so with love, not bitterness. True compassion for others means understanding their needs, their journey, and the impermanence of their path. Just as we wish to be free from the suffering of attachment, we should also wish the same for others. Letting go without bitterness is an act of compassion, both for ourselves and for the other person. It is a way of acknowledging that their journey, too, is impermanent, and that their happiness lies in moving forward without being held back by past attachments. The fourth and final step in letting go without bitterness is turning toward yourself. Often, when we grieve lost love, we believe we have lost a part of ourselves. We feel as though the love we had shared with another person defined who we are, and without it, we are incomplete. This is a deep illusion. The Buddha teaches us that we are not our relationships, our experiences, or our emotions. These are transient phenomena, but our true self, the Atman or the essence of our being, is unchanging. When we lose love, we have not lost ourselves. We are still whole, still complete, still capable of loving in the present moment. Turning inward and reconnecting with the self is a powerful act of healing. It is an opportunity to rediscover our own inner peace, our own joy, and our own capacity for love. The love we seek from others is often a reflection of the love we have within ourselves. When we lose love from the outside, we must turn inward to find the love that resides in our hearts. Buddhist teachings emphasize self-love and compassion as essential aspects of the spiritual path. Only when we love ourselves fully and unconditionally can we truly love others without expectation or attachment. Releasing love without bitterness is not a denial of the pain or grief we feel. It is an acceptance of the impermanence of life, of relationships, and of love itself. The pain of loss is real, but it is not something to hold onto. When we let go of our attachment to what was, we free ourselves to live fully in the present moment, with open hearts, ready to embrace the love that life offers us. The path to healing is not through clinging to the past, but through accepting the present as it is, letting go of what no longer serves us, and turning toward ourselves with compassion and understanding. In Buddhism, letting go is a practice. It requires mindfulness, awareness, and a deep understanding of the nature of suffering. But as the traveler discovered on his journey, letting go is also an act of freedom. When we release love without bitterness, we are no longer bound by the chains of attachment. We are free to love without fear, to live without regret, and to experience the fullness of life in its impermanent beauty. In conclusion, the teachings of Buddhism offer profound wisdom on the art of letting go. We are encouraged to honor what was, to not chase what is leaving, to release attachment while still loving, and to turn inward to rediscover our own wholeness. By following these teachings, we can release love without bitterness, without resentment, and without anger. We can let go gracefully, with compassion for ourselves and for others, and in doing so, we find the peace that comes from embracing impermanence and accepting the flow of life as it is. 7. The ultimate truth. The ultimate truth, the one that resonates deeply within the hearts of all who seek wisdom, is that love does not truly disappear, it transforms. The traveler's journey did not end at the monastery, nor did his lesson conclude with the monk's wise words. His path, like all paths in life, continued onward, winding through valleys of memory and mountains of longing. But with each step he took, the weight on his heart grew lighter, as though each footfall left behind the sorrow that had once weighed him down. The love he had once known so pure, so consuming had shifted. It was no longer the vibrant, all-encompassing affection he had experienced, but a quieter, subtler presence. It had become a lesson, a cherished memory, and a part of his own growth. It had left him, yes, but in leaving, it had shaped him. In its departure, it had not left him empty, it had left him with a deeper understanding of himself and of the nature of love itself. And so, as the traveler walked along the winding road, he came to a great river. Its waters flowed endlessly, winding through the landscape, a symbol of the ceaseless movement of life. He stood at its edge, watching the current rush past, the soft ripple of water against stone echoing in his mind. For a moment, he thought about the one who had left him, the absence that had filled his heart, the pain of longing, the countless nights spent wondering why things had ended. The questions of what went wrong and why couldn't it have lasted filled his thoughts. But then, as he watched the river flow, something inside him clicked into place. A profound understanding washed over him. Love had not disappeared. It had simply transformed. The love he once saw in another's eyes was now reflected back to him in his own, like the river that had moved from one place to another, taking on a new form but never ceasing to flow. Love had not died, it had moved, just as everything else in life moves. It had shifted, evolved, and become something else, a part of him, a part of the vast, interconnected web of existence. With this realization, the traveler did not weep. He did not fall into despair. He did not grieve as he once might have. Instead, he bowed not to the pain of loss, not to the absence that once filled his heart, but to love itself, in all its forms. He bowed in gratitude for the love he had experienced, for the lessons it had taught him, and for the strength it had given him to move forward. Then, with a heart that was now at peace, the traveler continued on his way, not in search of another love to possess, but in acceptance of love, wherever it may come from, and however it may leave. For love is not something to be held tightly, not something to be captured or confined. It is something to be lived, to be experienced, to be felt deeply in the moment, knowing that it will not last forever, but that does not make it any less beautiful. As the traveler walked away from the river, the truth of love's impermanence settled gently within him. He understood now that love, in its truest form, is not about attachment. It is not about ownership. It is not about holding on to something that cannot be held. Instead, love is about embracing what is here, in this moment, and letting it go when the time comes. It is about experiencing the fullness of love without the fear of loss. And in this, there is freedom. This Zen story, though simple in its telling, holds a profound truth about life, love, and loss. It teaches us that love, like everything else, is impermanent. And when we accept this truth, we free ourselves from the suffering of attachment. We stop clinging to what is fleeting and begin to live fully in the present, open to the love that comes and goes, and to the beauty of each passing moment. By embracing the impermanence of love, we let go of the idea that we must hold on to it forever. We release the need to control, possess, or maintain a relationship, and we learn to appreciate love for what it is, a precious gift that arrives, stays for a time, and then leaves. It is not the leaving that causes suffering, it is our refusal to accept the leaving that brings us pain. When we allow love to move, to transform, to flow as it naturally does, we are free. So, what is the ultimate lesson from this story? It is not simply that love is fleeting or that loss is inevitable. It is the understanding that in every moment, love is present in our hearts, in the world around us, in the connections we share with others. And when love shifts, when it fades, when it changes form, it is not gone. It is simply moving, becoming something else, and leaving behind a space for new love to enter. In that space, there is room for healing, for growth, and for the acceptance of life as it is. Now, as you reflect on this story and its lessons, ask yourself, are you holding on to something that no longer serves you? Are you clinging to a love that has faded, or are you ready to let it go with gratitude and grace? The path of love is one of constant transformation. But with acceptance, with an open heart, and with the wisdom of impermanence, we can live fully, love freely, and move through life with peace. If this story resonated with you, if you feel the pull to explore these teachings further, don't hesitate to engage with us. Like, share, and subscribe to our channel to continue your journey toward understanding, acceptance, and inner peace. There is always more to learn, more to uncover, and more wisdom to embrace. Let us walk this path together, exploring the depths of love, loss, and the beauty of letting go. And who knows? In our next video, we might explore more profound teachings on the impermanence of life. perhaps delving into the way we experience change and how we can find peace in the face of life's inevitable transitions. Stay tuned, and remember, love is not something to hold onto, it is something to live. So, live it fully, live it freely, and live it without regret. The journey is just beginning.